The fifth Democratic debate for the 2020 election was held in Atlanta on November 20th, 2019, and featured Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard, Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, and Tom Steyer. The event was hosted by MSNBC and The Washington Post. In this video, I'll break down the biggest moments from the debate. Those clashes between candidates that make a debate, and not just a series of prepared stump speeches that often fail to directly answer questions from moderators. In my last video about this debate, I mentioned all of these moments, and I talked about who won or lost, mainly based on the public perception I anticipate they are likely to create. In this video, I hope to check perception with a dose of reality. I'll show you the most heated exchanges, stopping every so often to answer the question, what's going on here? Because I'll be injecting both facts and opinion in these breakdowns, I want to begin by being upfront about my bias. My favorite candidate in the race currently is Bernie Sanders, who does not appear in any of these exchanges. But I still want to be clear about my ideological alignment with the left side of the party, in case that you believe ends up biasing me either for similar candidates because I tend to agree with them in terms of policy, or against them because I unconsciously see them as a threat to my preferred candidate. Speaking of bias, everyone has it, but I can proudly say that I have no economic bias when it comes to this work, as this channel is not sponsored by any political campaign or corporation or anything else for that matter. Revenue for this channel is only drawn from YouTube's standard ad monetization system and through viewers like you, who generously contribute through Patreon. If you like these videos and would like to consider supporting the channel, you can do so at patreon.com/questiontime. Typically in a debate, the big moments of conflict occur between two or more candidates. But one man managed to drop a number of damaging blows to his own campaign. So let's begin by talking about Biden versus Biden.
Vice President Biden, the Me Too movement has forced a cultural reckoning around the issue of sexual violence and harassment against women in America. Are there specific actions that you would take early in your administration to address this problem?
The framing of this question might have been more pointed, as Biden has come under fire for making women feel uncomfortable with inappropriate touching. But to be fair, I believe that the Time's Up and Me Too movements ought to focus on serious offenders like your Weinsteins and your Cosbys.
Yes, and by the way, it's one of the reasons, the first thing I would do is make sure we pass the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization, which I wrote. The fact I didn't write the reauthorization, I wrote the original act.
That's true. Biden deserves credit for not just introducing, but also working across the aisle to get it passed. According to an Obama White House press release, since the passage of the Violence Against Women Act in 1994, rates of domestic violence have decreased by over 50%.
The fact is that what happens now is that we, in fact, have to fundamentally change the culture of how women are treated.
Biden, you can see, is already beginning to fumble his words here.
That's why, as vice president, when I asked the president I could start the movement on the college campuses to say, it's on us. It's everyone's responsibility.
Okay, that was a little hard to follow, but he mentioned Obama, which is, I think, a big part of his campaign strategy.
We do not spend nearly enough time dealing with. I was stunned when I did a virtual town meeting that told me 30,000 people were on the call, young people between 15 and 25.
What call? Are you following what he's talking about?
And found out, I said, what do you need to make you safer on college campuses and on your schools? You know what they said? Get men involved. Engage the rest of the community.
Okay.
And that's when we started this movement on the college campuses to fundamentally change the culture.
Okay.
No man has a right to raise a hand to a woman in anger other than in self-defense, and that's rarely ever occurs.
Look, we make fun of Trump for talking like an idiot, but Biden is clearly doing it too. He's losing track of what he's saying as he's saying it. No man has the right to raise a hand to a woman in anger other than in self-defense, and that rarely ever occurs. Why mention the self-defense thing when you already just qualified it by in anger? This is where things start to really slip for Biden.
And so we have to just change the culture, period, and keep punching at it and punching at it and punching at it.
In the words of Joe Biden, come on, man. You're talking about domestic violence, and then you say we need to keep punching at it. 3 times. Yeah, that's not a good look.
It will be a no, I really mean it. It's a gigantic issue.
He was responding there to the uncomfortable laughter emerging from his poor choice of words. Given his response, it seemed like he didn't catch on to why everyone was laughing.
And we have to make it clear from the...
This picture is worth 1,000 words. Harris is holding back a smile, Sanders is keeping his eyes down, and Biden carries on talking, not understanding that he's just embarrassed himself. Now, while Biden is still the front runner in the nationwide polling, the sense of things for many is that with these kinds of gaffes, he doesn't have staying power in this race. Who will replace him as the leading moderate candidate? Well, one possibility would be Pete Buttigieg, who prior to this debate had been surging in Iowa and New Hampshire. Multiple candidates were given opportunities to clash with him throughout the debate. Harris, for example, was set up by the moderators to criticize him over the use of a stock image of a Kenyan woman on his website, an embarrassing token of his lack of support from the black community. She might also have done well to raise the fact that he appeared to essentially fake endorsements from black leaders, putting their names as signatories on a campaign letter touting support for his Douglas plan, and only giving these signatories an option to opt out, with a deadline of just a few hours to do so. But Harris backed down, essentially dismissing the narrow issue of the stock image and broadly agreeing with him on general themes. But Harris was not the only candidate to be set up to clash with the South Bend mayor. So let's talk about Buttigieg versus Klobuchar.
Senator Klobuchar, you said this of Mayor Buttigieg, quote, "Of the women on the stage, do I think that we would be standing on that stage if..."
That was her looking over at Pete, looked like.
"We had the experience he had. No, I don't. Maybe we're held to a different standard." Senator, what did you mean by that?
Now, before Klobuchar begins talking, I gotta say, Pete looks kind of shook. He does have significantly less experience than most of the other candidates in this race, including Amy Klobuchar. Having to spar with her over experience would be a very difficult battle for him to win, particularly with the framing of sexism looming over the conversation. Fortunately for Pete, here's what she had to say.
First of all...
Okay, so right there, the mood totally changes. Klobuchar gestures to Pete in a friendly way and smiles, a reminder that she doesn't go after moderate candidates. They're on the same team. He looks pretty relieved.
I've made very clear I think that Pete is qualified to be up on this stage, and I am honored to be standing next to him.
Oof, that last bit was a little humiliating, I gotta say. I'm not a big fan of Klobuchar, but she's a United States senator. She's honored to be standing next to the 37-year-old mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Maybe that's just a polite thing to say, but the honor should be going the other way around.
But what I said was true. Women are held to a higher standard.
So here you go. She just made it a broad cultural thing, not a Pete Buttigieg thing. Next, she makes it a historical issue, further distancing herself from any kind of criticism of Pete's qualifications or lack thereof.
Otherwise, we could play a game called Name Your Favorite Woman President, which we can't do because it has all been men.
There you go. Buttigieg smiles and nods along in perfect agreement, as a direct criticism of him is washed away into a general theme of milquetoast feminism that he can agree with. We started with no woman would be given the automatic credit and support that Pete did, given his inexperience, and ended up with, wouldn't it be nice for a woman to be president? Of course, we'll save that for another election, because Klobuchar seems to agree it's totally fine if the whiz kid mayor skips the line. Now, you might believe that fresh blood is needed in Washington, and maybe you believe that Buttigieg should be that guy. But it's really sad that Klobuchar is agreeing to that. It's a big reason why he did as well as he did in the 5th Democratic debate, and why she has no hope of securing the nomination for herself. Speaking of having no hope of securing the nomination, let's talk about the exciting clash between Kamala Harris and Tulsi Gabbard. This one began with Tulsi Gabbard being asked about her recent criticisms of Hillary Clinton and what she called the rot in the Democratic Party, which, by the way, began after Clinton completely smeared Gabbard, calling her a Russian asset, among other things. The smearing of Gabbard, by the way, seems to be a recurrent theme of this campaign cycle. Gabbard responded, breaking down how systemic corruption works and doing her normal number about ending regime change conflicts and using the money wasted in foreign quagmires instead to invest in domestic programs.
As president, I will end this foreign policy, end these regime change wars, work to end this new Cold War and arms race, and instead invest our hard-earned taxpayer dollars actually into serving the needs of the American people right here at home.
Interestingly, the moderators seem to interpret all of that as a challenge to Kamala Harris, as they called on her for a response.
Senator Harris, any response?
Oh, sure.
I mean, even Harris seemed surprised that the moderators decided to call on her for rebuttal. But she was almost certainly waiting for this opportunity because she came prepared for a rematch with Tulsi.
I think that it's unfortunate that we have someone on the stage who is attempting to be the Democratic nominee for president of the United States, who during the Obama administration spent 4 years full-time on Fox News.
Did Gabbard ever appear on Fox News? Yes. Was it full-time? Obviously not. I guess you can decide whether you think that's bad or not, depending on whether you think it's a good or bad thing to reach out to people who are not in your ideological bubble. Personally, I think it's a good thing to reach out to conservative voters.
Criticizing President Obama.
To be clear, she criticized Obama about, guess what? Regime change wars. The guy who won a Nobel Peace Prize before he did anything happened to also extend the Bush administration's conflicts, opened up new ones, and expanded the drone program. So yeah, in my opinion, Obama is not above criticism.
That's
who
ridiculous,
has spent full-time,
That's
who
ridiculous.
has spent full-time criticizing people on this stage as affiliated with the Democratic Party.
She has a lot of full-time jobs. Okay, I don't know what she's referring to there. I guess she's saying if you criticize the party, you're being really mean to all its members automatically. I don't really know how that could be the case, though, since Gabbard herself is, of course, a member of the party.
When Donald Trump was elected, not even sworn in, buddied up to Steve Bannon to get a meeting with Donald Trump in the Trump Tower.
Okay, so that's more or less true, and Steve Bannon even said that he wanted Gabbard to join the Trump administration, but Gabbard did not. For context, Tulsi was also not the only Democrat to meet with Trump. Just 1 week prior, Trump met with Michelle Rhee about education and was speculated to be considered as an option for Secretary of Education before he gave the role to his campaign contributor Betsy DeVos. Now, why did Gabbard meet with Trump? Well, she explained at the time that it was to discourage the then president-elect from engaging in, can you guess, regime change war. Here's what she said about meeting with Trump at the time.
Fails to call a war criminal by what he is as a war criminal.
That's obviously a reference to Assad. Gabbard has been called an Assad apologist by Harris in the past. Gabbard did refuse to directly call Assad a war criminal in the past on the grounds that I think that the evidence needs to be gathered, and as I have said before, if there is evidence that he has committed war crimes, he should be prosecuted as such. But it's not as if she refuses to call Assad names. Gabbard said of him on Chris Cuomo's show, for example, he's a brutal dictator, just like Saddam Hussein, just like Gaddafi in Libya. Okay, now this next bit seems a bit disconnected and irrelevant.
And then spends full time during the course of this campaign, again, criticizing the Democratic Party. What we need on the stage in November is someone who has the ability to win. And by that, we need someone on that stage who has the ability to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump, and someone who has the ability to rebuild the Obama coalition and bring the party and the nation together. I believe I am that candidate.
Yeah, that's just a scattershot of electability nonsense. Let's see what Gabbard has to say in response.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes.
Congresswoman Gabbard, I'll give you a chance to respond.
What Senator Harris is doing is unfortunately continuing to traffic in lies and smears and innuendos because...
I mean, fair enough. Full-time on Fox News safely qualifies as a lie if you take it literally. The rest was all pretty misleading and clearly meant to portray Gabbard as a secret Republican or a secret Assad toady.
She cannot challenge the substance of the argument that I'm making, the leadership and the change that I'm seeking to bring in our foreign policy, which only makes me guess that she will, as president, continue the status quo, continue the Bush-Clinton-Trump foreign policy of regime change wars.
For the record, Kamala Harris, at least according to her website, agrees with Gabbard on getting out of Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. She does not reject all intervention, however, though she's pretty vague. She doesn't exactly specify how she will deal with foreign policy challenges beyond working with allies. It seems pretty clear that foreign policy is pretty much an afterthought for her campaign.
Which is deeply destructive. This is personal to me because I served in Iraq. I left my seat in the state legislature in Hawaii, volunteered to deploy to Iraq, where I served in a medical unit where every single day I saw the terribly high human cost of war. I take very seriously the responsibility that the president has to serve as commander-in-chief, to lead our armed forces, and to make sure always, no, I'm not going to put party interests first. I will put the interests of the American people above all else.
Congresswoman. I want to briefly...
Okay, so Gabbard bringing up her own military experience might have been a good thing for her. But despite dismissing what Harris said as smears and innuendos, she doesn't really do much to counter Harris's narrative. So it's not a powerful defense. It's not really a powerful attack on Harris either, since she really just says she thinks maybe Harris will continue to do what past administrations have done.
Give Senator Harris a final second to respond.
I believe that what our nation needs right now is a nominee who can speak to all people.
Except, of course, war criminals like Assad, or Steve Bannon, or Donald Trump, or any Fox News viewers. I assume that's what she means. By all people, she means the good people that we like, which is half of Americans, and maybe some foreigners too.
I spent my entire career standing mostly in a courtroom speaking 5 words, Kamala Harris for the people.
Okay, let me get this straight. You spent all of your career standing, mostly in a courtroom, saying your own name and the words, for the people. I don't know what she means to be saying. This is best case scenario, word salad. Worst case scenario, Harris has caught Joe Biden's brain disease. Let's just watch that one more time because she looks so proud saying absolute nonsense.
I spent my entire career standing mostly in a courtroom speaking 5 words, Kamala Harris for the people. And it was about all the people, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender, regardless of where they live geographically, regardless of the party with which they're registered to vote or the language their grandmother speaks.
Inclusiveness? Check. Although I'm very offended that she did not mention orientation, religion, ability, or the language their grandfather speaks.
We need someone on this debate stage in November who has the ability to unify the country.
Except Fox News viewers.
And to win the election. And I believe, again, I am that candidate.
No, you don't. Do you really think she thinks she's that candidate? Look at your poll numbers, Kamala. You're canceled. Gabbard will not be the candidate either, by the way. But both Harris and Gabbard have a better chance than a billionaire who bought his way on stage, which brings us to Steyer versus Biden.
I'm the only person on this stage who will say that climate is the #1 priority for me. Vice President Biden won't say it.
Hold. Remember that. Vice President Biden won't say it.
Senator Warren won't say it. It's a state of emergency, and I would declare a state of emergency on day 1.
Yeah, if Steyer gets into the White House, that would be a state of emergency.
I would use the emergency powers of the presidency.
Okay, honestly, even though climate change is a very serious challenge that needs to be dealt with, it's kind of terrifying the idea that this billionaire wants to buy his way into office and then immediately declare an emergency. I will declare martial law on day 1. There will be a 7 p.m. curfew. The socialists will be purged from the Democratic Party. Republicans will be declared enemies of the state. He didn't say any of that. But that's kind of the tone I'm getting, which is not effective, to say the least.
I know that we have to do this. I've spent a decade fighting and beating oil companies, stopping pipelines, stopping fossil fuel plants, ensuring clean energy across the country.
Remember that. He's spent a decade, 10 years. So, since 2009. Decades after everyone already knew about climate change. So what was he doing before that? Just keep that in mind when we go back to Joe Biden.
I know that we have to do this. I also know that we can do this. I would make this the #1 priority of my foreign policy as well.
Okay, so we have to do this. We can do this. It's #1. But wait, I forget, Tom. Can we do this?
We can do this.
Nice.
And create literally millions of good-paying union jobs across this country.
I love that he's saying this as though he thought of the idea. We fight climate change by investing in infrastructure and research. It's kind of like FDR's New Deal, except it's green. So I call it the Green New Dealing with Climate Change Steyer plan.
I would make sure that my climate policy was led by environmental justice.
Guess what, Steyer? That's also in the Green New Deal.
And members of the communities where this society has chosen to put our air and water pollution, which are low-income black and brown communities.
Also in the Green New Deal.
And when we ask, how are we going to pull this country together? How about this?
Whatever you're going to say, I am in.
We take on the biggest challenge in history, we save the world, and we do it together. Do you think that would pull America together?
You're nodding a lot, but no, Republicans would definitely hate this.
Do you think that would pull America together? I do.
Well, that's because you're an idiot. Biden, your response?
Quickly, Vice President Biden, you were name-checked there. I'd like to give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, it was. I think it is the existential threat to humanity. It's the number one issue.
Now, do you remember when Steyer said Biden would not say it was the number one issue?
I'm the only person on this stage who will say that climate is the number one priority for me. Vice President Biden won't say it.
It's the number one issue.
Now look at Steyer's response. It's beautiful.
And I might add, I don't really need kind of a...
Yeah, Steyer looks broken. But now Biden has a tricky task to perform. Push back on Steyer without losing any potential future billionaire money.
A lecture from my friend.
Nice. Call him your friend. That takes the sting off.
While I was passing the first climate change bill, and that PolitiFact said was a game changer, while I managed the $90 billion recovery plan, investing more money in infrastructure that related to clean energy than any time we've ever done it. My friend was...
Here comes the tough part, but go ahead, Biden. You called him your friend again. That should cover you.
Producing more coal mines and produced more coal around the world, according to the press, than all of Great Britain produces.
More than all of Great Britain's producers. Yikes. There's the heavy blow from Biden. Now he's going to smooth it back over.
Now, I welcome him back into the fold here, and he's been there for a long while.
How is Steyer smiling? Does he not understand that he just got wrecked on his massive hypocrisy? Biden just crushed you, my friend. Okay, so obviously this was bad for Steyer, but what really takes the cake is that after all this, after him saying no one else will make climate change number one, he reasserted that same claim in his closing statement, so that the last thing we all see from Steyer in this debate is a reminder of the one time someone bothered to take him on and he was completely crushed.
I'm the only person on this stage who will say that climate is my first priority.
It's sad. It really is. I do sincerely feel bad for Steyer at this point. So let's move on. Next up is Gabbard versus Buttigieg. This is the second of two major scuffles Gabbard was involved in. In my winners and losers video, I explained that I thought she was going to lose support as a result of these exchanges, and at least according to 538, she did seem to pick up more unfavorability from this debate than any other candidate on stage. Despite this problem of perception, I actually think that on substance, Gabbard generally did quite well. In her dust-up with Harris, Gabbard was more honest and accurate with what she was saying, but was essentially just smeared with misleading information, which she failed to counter. With Buttigieg, the problem for Gabbard was more about how he delivered a more memorable line, although you could say that she's a little misleading about his record too.
But I want to get back to Pete Buttigieg and his comment about experience. Pete, you'll agree that the service that we both have provided to our country as veterans by itself does not qualify us to serve as commander-in-chief.
I don't actually love that she said that, because in past debates she's actually cited her military experience as evidence that she is prepared for the role.
I think the most recent example of your inexperience in national security and foreign policy came from your recent careless statement about how you as president would be willing to send our troops to Mexico to fight the cartels.
Okay, so did he say he would consider sending troops to Mexico? Yes. He told ABC 7 reporter Adrienne Alpert, "If it is in the context of a security partnership, then I would welcome ways to make sure that America is doing what we can to ensure our neighbor to the south is secure." He also added more caveats on this, speaking in a candidate forum in Los Angeles, saying he'd only do it if American lives were on the line, and there were no other choices, and treaty obligations necessitated the involvement. There is a scenario where we could have security cooperation as we do with countries around the world. Now I would only order American troops into conflict if there were no other choice, if American lives were on the line, and if this were necessary in order for us to uphold our treaty obligations. But we could absolutely be in some kind of partnership role if and only if it is welcomed by our partner south of the border. He also suggested that part of what we do is make drug trafficking less profitable by walking away from the failed war on drugs here in the United States. And his campaign reiterated to the Sacramento Bee that he would only be open to using the U.S. military to help deal with Mexican cartel violence as a last resort. So Tulsi saying that he would be willing to send troops to Mexico to fight the cartels is accurate, but it also removes all the caveats and conditions Buttigieg put on that statement. It also tonally misrepresents his claim, since she makes it sound like he's eager to do it, but he seemed restrained in his language. Beyond this, I actually don't see what the problem with this is. We're not talking about toppling a foreign government. We're talking about supporting an ally against a pernicious force. It would be a stabilizing action carried out with the consent of a US-friendly, legitimately elected democratic government that borders the United States, not a destabilizing action carried out overseas, against the wishes of the people who live there.
As Commander-in-Chief, leader of our armed forces, I bring extensive experience serving for 7 years in Congress, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, on the Armed Services Committee, on the Homeland Security Committee, meeting with leaders of countries around the world, working with military commanders of different commands, dealing with high-level national security briefings, understanding what's necessary, the preparation that I've gotten to walk in on day one to serve as Commander-in-Chief.
Okay, so those are all legitimate reasons to think that she's been preparing herself to be Commander-in-Chief, but I wish she would explain why it's not a good idea to send support to Mexico.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'll allow you to respond.
I know that it's par for the course in Washington to take remarks out of context, but that is outlandish even by the standards of today's politics.
I actually don't think it is. She oversimplified what he said, quite substantially, but didn't change the central meaning.
Are you saying that you didn't say that?
I was talking about U.S.-Mexico cooperation. We've been doing security cooperation with Mexico for years, with law enforcement cooperation and a military relationship that could continue to be developed with training relationships, for example.
Okay, so there, he's gotten to explain the context there. But now he actually takes over the distortion game.
Do you seriously think anybody on this stage is proposing invading Mexico?
That's not what I said.
That's building.
Okay, so that's the line. That's the line that I believe people will remember. That's what people are going to think Tulsi said Pete said. But she didn't say he said that. She said he said that he would send troops to Mexico to help fight the cartel, which is clearly not an invasion. It's exactly what he did say, just without the details and conditions.
I'm talking about building up alliances, and if your question is about experience, let's also talk about judgment.
Okay, it's smear time.
One of the foreign leaders you mentioned meeting was Bashar al-Assad.
I thought it was Bashar al-Assad. Okay, maybe I've been saying it wrong this whole time. Yep, Arabic is one of the languages that Buttigieg speaks. I think I've been saying this wrong the whole time, and will continue to do so.
I have, in my experience, such as it is, whether you think it counts or not, since it wasn't accumulated in Washington, enough judgment that I would not have sat down with a murderous dictator like that.
Okay, I don't really need to explain all of this to you guys, do I? In 2017, Tulsi took a trip to Syria and had a closed-door meeting with Assad and didn't seek prior approval from party leaders to do so. You can criticize the fact that this was not the best move, especially not in terms of optics, and I have, but the underlying insinuation, which has been outright said by, for example, a New York Times columnist who called her a Assad toady, and Hillary Clinton who called her a Russian agent, is that the reason she was against American intervention in Syria was because she wanted to help Russia and their ally in the region, Syria. That insinuation, of course, is very easily dismissed by the fact that Gabbard is consistently against American military intervention. She's cautioned against going into Venezuela and Iran, for example, and constantly decries the policy of regime change wars.
Congresswoman Gabbard, let me allow you to respond.
Thank you. You were asked directly whether you would send our troops to Mexico to fight cartels, and your answer was yes. The fact checkers can check this out.
Very unfortunate that Tulsi thinks the fact checkers will be on her side here, as the mainstream press very clearly is not. The New York Times fact-checked the exchange, and instead of concentrating on her accurate claim, they fact-checked his claim that was not in contradiction to what she said. They also claimed she was being misleading. The Sacramento Bee had a far more reasonable fact-check. There are two claims Gabbard is making. While she correctly stated Buttigieg would be willing to send our troops to Mexico to fight the cartels, his response to a question about drug cartels was far more nuanced than a simple yes. Buttigieg also incorrectly attributed Gabbard's claim, given she never suggested Buttigieg supported invading Mexico.
No. But your point about judgment is absolutely correct. Our commander-in-chief does need to have good judgment. And what you've just pointed out is that you would lack the courage to meet with both adversaries and friends to ensure the peace and national security of our nation.
This is a good point by Gabbard. It's a cliche for a reason. We make peace with our enemies, not our friends.
For us, leaders like JFK, who met with Khrushchev, like Roosevelt, who met with Stalin,
like Donald Trump,
Reagan, who met like...
I think Pete's point here is rather asinine. Of all the things to criticize Trump for, meeting with Kim Jong-un is not one of them. It is very fair to criticize Trump for getting nothing out of that meeting, but trying to get a deal, trying to make peace, I don't see the harm.
Reagan, who met and worked with Gorbachev. These issues of national security are incredibly important. I will meet with and do what is necessary to make sure that no more of our brothers and sisters in uniform are needlessly sent into harm's way fighting regime change wars that undermine our national security. I'll bring real leadership and experience to the White House.
I've got to respond.
Senator Sanders, I'm going to have a response.
Okay, so Pete never did get a chance to respond to this as Sanders interjected and changed the topic, which I saw as a tactical error on his part. I think it would have been better for Sanders to allow Gabbard and Pete to continue the fight. In general, I thought Pete made worse arguments and relied on smears and innuendo, whereas Gabbard did much more work to promote a positive policy position, specifically a message of peace, which tends to be, on the whole, popular with the American people. Unfortunately for Gabbard, Pete's mischaracterization of what she said, I believe, was the most memorable line from the exchange, and the fact checkers in the New York Times, at least, are far more likely to side with the moderate Democrat. So yeah, all in all, I agree with Pete's original policy proposal that the US should be open to potentially supporting the Mexican government, and I think he won the exchange when it comes to public perception. But he also relied on dirtier tactics, and Gabbard gave a far more substantive argument. Okay, so let's move on to the final big moment. My favorite exchange of the night. Booker versus Biden.
I wanted to return back to this issue of black voters. I have a lifetime of experience with black voters. I've been one since I was 18.
That's not even a good joke, but he really got a lot of love from the crowd for that one.
Nobody on this stage should need a focus group to hear from African-American voters. Black voters are pissed off, and they're worried. They're pissed off because the only time our issues seem to be really paid attention to by politicians is when people are looking for their vote.
Well, yes and no. Politicians aren't always looking for black voters.
But if you running for president and you want black people to vote for you, that's a downfall. That's not going to happen.
I'm not asking for your vote.
I have a lot of respect for the vice president. He has sworn me into my office as a hero. This week I hear him literally say that I don't think we should legalize marijuana. I thought you might have been high when you said it.
Okay, that right there is one of the more iconic moments from this debate. Biden's physical response is funny, and Booker is so good at criticizing other candidates with that kind of friendly vibe. That's clearly like Booker's superpower. He can directly insult another candidate somehow without coming off like a jerk.
And let me tell you, because marijuana in our country is already legal for privileged people.
That's absolutely correct. As the ACLU points out, for example, marijuana use is roughly equal among blacks and whites, yet blacks are 3.73 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana possession.
And it's the war on drugs has been a war on black and brown people. And so let me just say this. With more African Americans under criminal supervision in America than all the slaves since 1850.
Booker made this same claim back in the Houston debate. At the time, Time magazine did a pretty good fact check. Now, he used the language criminal supervision, which might include people on probation and make his numbers more accurate, but I couldn't find that stat. Let's also point out that while the spirit of what he is saying is true, that black people are disproportionately criminalized, the fact that these numbers are anywhere close to each other is largely due to the general increase in population over time.
Do not roll up into communities and not talk directly to issues that are going to relate to the liberation of children, because there are people in Congress right now that admit to smoking marijuana, while there are people, our kids are in jail right now for those drug crimes. And so these
That's true. In fact, the last 3 presidents before Trump all admitted to smoking marijuana. As for Trump, he doesn't even drink. Possibly because he's a secret Muslim. I mean, he says he's a Christian, and I believe him, especially since he's made reference to Corinthians 2, but I don't know. Could be that he's a secret Muslim. I'm just saying it would explain some things. By the way, obviously I'm joking. Trump is not a Muslim. That would require him to worship something other than himself. Big, beautiful buildings and daughters with tremendous bodies that perhaps he'd be dating if she weren't his daughter.
The kind of issues that mean a lot to our community, and if we don't have somebody authentically, we lost the last election. Let me just give you this data example. We lost in Wisconsin because of a massive diminution, a lot of reasons, but there was a massive diminution in the African American vote. We need to have someone that can inspire, as Kamala said, to inspire African Americans to the polls at record numbers.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Vice President Biden, you can respond to that.
I'll be very brief. Number one, I think we should decriminalize marijuana, period.
To be clear, Biden has talked about it being a gateway, and he is not for legalization. Rather, he supports moving it from a Schedule 1 substance to a Schedule 2. And people still go to jail for Schedule 2. Period.
And I think anyone who has a record should be let out of jail, their record's expunged, it be completely zeroed out. But I do think it makes sense, based on data, that we should study what the long-term effects are for the use of marijuana. That's all it is. Number one, everybody gets out, record expunged. Secondly, I'm part of that Obama coalition.
Here's where it gets really good.
I come out of the black community in terms of my support.
Unbelievable line. By the way, guys, I think this is a good time for me to let you know that I come out of the black community in terms of most of the music that I listen to. So Biden and I have that in common. We both come out of the black community in terms of not coming out of the black community in any way whatsoever.
If you notice, I have more people supporting me in the black community that have announced for me because they know me. They know who I am. 3 former chairs of the Black Caucus. The only African-American woman that ever been elected to the United States Senate.
Biden is referring to Senator Carol Moseley Braun here. He clearly said only, however, when there's another black woman who was elected to the United States Senate, Kamala Harris, who is running against Joe Biden. Let's acknowledge, by the way, how sad it is that those are the only 2. But let's also not skip past Biden's wonderful use of the term Blafrican.
A whole range of people.
No,
my point is
that's not true. The other one is here.
I said the first.
You did not say the first. You meant the first, but that's not what you said. I love Kamala's shrug here. This was one of the moments in this debate that made her look likable.
So my point is that one of the reasons I was picked to be vice president was because of my relationship, long-standing relationship with the black community. I was part of that coalition.
Okay, I've pointed this out numerous times now, but this is a ridiculous lie that Biden repeats over and over again. That the reason Obama picked him as a running mate is his relationship with the black community. It's ridiculous. It's exactly the other way around. The only reason he has any support from the black community is because he was picked as VP by Barack Obama. But the reason Obama picked Biden as his running mate was obviously not because he needed to shore up the black votes. Obama clearly had that voting bloc locked up all by himself. No, the reason he picked Biden was because Biden would shore up white voters who might be hesitant to support a black president. Let's not forget that during the primary race, Biden praised Obama for being clean and articulate and described this whole situation as a storybook, man.
I mean, you got the first sort of mainstream African American who was articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man.
Are we really supposed to believe that Obama picked this guy to strengthen his relationship with the black community? It's ridiculous. Politicians, of course, often misrepresent information, distorting the facts in various ways and by varying degrees. They have personal interests at stake, and their performances are intended to persuade you into supporting their campaigns. That much is obvious. But we also must not forget the initiating questions, which often spark heated debate moments, are themselves often skewed by the bias of the moderator asking and the news organization for which they work. I've done a little fact-checking in this video on distortions presented by the candidates, but let's take a quick moment to look at how the whole thing might be a little skewed by the moderators as well. While breaking down the biases of each of the moderators of MSNBC and the Washington Post question by question would be an exhausting and largely futile exercise, we might get some sense in which the November debate was biased by looking at a more objective set of data. I believe this graph should serve to do that. It was prepared by 538 and compares the polling averages of candidates against the number of words they were able to speak during the debate. By adding a general trend line, we see that some candidates were clearly able to get out more words than one might expect given their relevancy as measured by polling averages, while others were given less of an opportunity than you might expect would be fair. The advantaged candidates above the line are mainly moderate establishment-approved candidates: Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Kamala Harris. Elizabeth Warren is also above the line. Below the line are Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, and Andrew Yang, all I think we can agree outsiders when it comes to the Democratic establishment. Two other candidates are also below the line: Tom Steyer and Joe Biden. Both are Democratic insiders for sure, but I think they may be seen as on their way out when it comes to this primary race. Whatever the reasons, these candidates seem to have gained an inflated opportunity to speak, while these others were not. Now, I believe this distortion is caused by the unconscious establishment bias of the moderators, but that's just my interpretation. Let me know in the comments section what you think about this. What's going on here?
Just keep punching at it and punching at it and punching at it, period.